Thanks for tuning in to Becoming Something, where we promise to keep the conversation honest and real for young adults in their 20s and 30s. Every moment we live is training for a future moment, and that's why we do this podcast, because we want you to be prepared for everything that life is going to throw at you. Our hope with this podcast is that it would help you become all that God desires you to be. So with that in mind, let's jump right in to this week's episode of Becoming Something.
What's up, podcast world? It's your boy JP in the podcast studio with Kathy Davidson.
What's up?
You just laughed in the mic.
I was not ready to start, but here I am.
And Nathan Hilgenkamp.
What's up,
You gotta
players?
be on your A game
I
all
was
the time. We
literally
came in
drinking
here.
a sip of water.
No, we're ready to go. Nate's ready to go.
Kathy has the biggest
I know.
thing of water. She's like, I don't know if your schools had football teams, but in college, like the football team, or even in high school, they like have a jug of water and they just walk around with it. So Kathy's
so
trying
like
to
the
play football
quarterback?
next
This
year.
is
Okay.
overachieving H2O, ionized.
It is expensive water.
What-
And you know what I
is it-
call this?
What does
It's
it do?
pH water.
Yeah, 9.5.
It helps.
Yeah, with what?
I don't need to say that on
No.
the podcast.
And what does it help with? I mean, what kind of things? I mean, it helps with.
I have a little bit of acid reflux from having all these kids.
And this helps with acid
It really
reflux?
helps if I drink that expensive water once a day.
Is that true?
It really does.
Who
Because
told you that?
the pH like helps level
Totally.
my system.
I like actually.
Is this real?
Well, so I had friends in college who took.
You're
this,
backing me up?
I think it's really similar. My friends in college, they wanted to get really strong, and they bought deer antler spray online, and
Yeah.
I think they sprayed it in their mouth or whatever. I think it had like.
Do not. Hey, becoming something.
What is
Do
your
not
brain on?
spray deer antler sauce.
It's as effective
in
as
your
that
mouth.
water. Yeah.
What are you
Nate,
talking
where is your...
about? Deer antler sauce. What are you
Spray.
talking about?
Deer antler spray. It's
I
a
knew
thing.
it. I knew it was too good
Deer
to be
antler-
true. I thought you were backing me up on
Deer
something.
antler
No,
spray.
water is water is water
is
is
not
water.
a thing. You just totally
Not
made
all
that
water
up.
is created.
That's a
equal.
thing, but I'm just saying people will buy stuff if it's easy to convince people to buy stuff. That's probably a pyramid scheme. That's
Okay, but it helps.
It does help.
It does help. So
I have
if
acid-
they want
I have bad
to
acid reflux, too.
sponsor us, you should drink one a day.
I feel like it's stress induced.
Oh, from being around us.
Sometimes. I mean, I just noticed that when I
On
leave the
Tuesdays,
podcast
yeah.
recording,
Your heart rate's a little higher.
yeah, my acid reflux is
Yeah.
a little unruly.
It's okay.
What do you want to say? He's over here panting like a dog. Just he's ready, guys. Buckle up,
Can't wait to
because
hear what
this
you
is
have to
going
say.
to be profound. Go.
so. Where does the acid reflux? Where does it go? What is an acid reflux?
Where does the acid reflux?
Guys,
this is
speaking
why.
of really smart
This
people,
is why we are the number 15 podcast in the world. Guys, leave reviews, share the podcast if it's helpful. Nate's about to tell you something profound.
I just think it's shocking how famous we are.
What?
Why? Do you
You just said 15. I'm like, how?
Because your mom has been sharing
That's
this
right.
podcast with all her bridge friends.
Her Bible study. It's just
She's
love
not
it.
old enough to play bridge.
We are a huge hit with the empty nesters. You're losing relevance every day. And I feel like your shirt's not helping us.
Yeah, right. I bought it on eBay.
Is that true?
Do people still buy
That's
things
true.
on eBay?
It was a while ago.
Oh, I buy
but,
things on eBay all the time.
yeah.
Wow.
I just
so
think
not
this next person could really help us explain where acid reflux is.
He is smart. We're bringing on Andy Crouch, who is a leading voice today.
And a
Not
lot
on-
of things. Not on
on
that.
acid reflux, but he did write this book, The Life We're Looking For, and he also wrote Techwise Family and several
I've
other
heard
resources.
incredible things about him. I'm so excited
Yeah.
to talk to him today.
Let's go, Andy
Make a
Crouch. Bring him
conversation.
on. Andy Crouch, thank you so much for jumping on the Becoming Something podcast with us today. So just as a reminder, I'm JP, Jonathan Pokluda. This is Kathy
Hi.
Davidson, and this is, well, it doesn't really matter. No, this is Nate
I'm just the face.
Hilgenkamp.
Yeah.
He's
The face of the podcast.
and so he's the face for radio. We're so excited about you being on here.
I am too. Thanks so much for the invitation.
Yeah, and so really, like, the main thing I want to talk about is this resource, which has the greatest title ever, The Life We're Looking For.
Yeah, that's nice.
I mean, I've been working on titling a book, which has been a much much more difficult assignment than I would have thought that it would be.
Than you would have thought, yes.
And so just reading that,
It
The
seems
Life We're
stressful.
Looking
Always
For,
is.
I was like, man, I might call it The Life We're Looking For Part 2. A follow-up, a sequel. But yeah, just what prompted you to write this?
Yeah.
Well, I wrote a book about technology a couple years ago called the Techwise Family, which
Sure.
you all may know about.
Yeah. Everyone
and
knows
that's
about.
a very well.
It's an amazing
it
resource.
is.
It's incredible.
It's so encouraging. I wrote it. I thought no one is going to read this book because it's too radical. It asks too much of people. It has ended up being, it's my best-selling book in the sense that it has outsold all the other books I've written combined.
Oh, no.
So it turns out people did want to read
Yeah.
About this subject, but that book is very concrete, very practical for people at a particular stage of life, raising children primarily, kind of life as a family at home. And the more I thought about it, I thought there are bigger, deeper issues here that we all need to take account of that actually matter for not just parents and kids and screen time and that kind of stuff, but kind of the deep story of what's happened to us as human beings as our world has become more and more technological. And I only write books when I feel like I have no alternative because I hate writing books. I find writing books very difficult. I don't know if you feel this way, JP, but
Sure.
But I felt like I need to sort out what a set of redemptive moves are here in a world that I think has become a very bad place to be a person. So that's what this book is about.
Man.
Yeah, were you gonna say something?
Oh no, that just sounds really interesting.
Let's talk about that for just another
Yeah.
minute before we dive into The Life We're Looking For. And so with Techwise Family, I mean, I know all three of us, like you and I've had conversations. We've had conversations just around being addicted to our phones, having a difficult time separating from it. We're seeing the highest levels of depression, highest levels of anxiety, highest levels of teen suicide, cutting, really affecting teen females. And I know that the coddling of the American mind guys have talked about this recently. And just, I mean, any words you would say. So our audience, Andy, is primarily young adults, mostly single, not exclusively, but people in their 20s and 30s. I mean, just any word of warning, any word of caution, exhortation, admonishment as it relates to our relationship with our phones?
Well, I think the phones are on the top of a stack that we've built. You can think of modern technology as being built like first on the financial revolution, which was the 15th, 16th century, then the industrial revolution, which is 17th, 18th, 19th century, and then the computational revolution, which is 20th and 21st century. And the phones are just the condensed like realization of, in some ways, everything we hoped we could do. Omnipresence, omniscience, omnipotence, all these things that we wanted. So I think it is true that the introduction of smartphones and the wide availability of smartphones, and maybe slightly separate or distinct from that, the rise of this thing called social media, which is a very particular like application layer on top of that. I think they have brought to a very sharp point issues that were actually bubbling all along in the technological story. So you should absolutely be wary of, and in a way worried about, the default settings of these devices. That is, the way they're designed to work by default, the sort of, so for example, it's very hard to turn them off. Like on my smartphone now, I have to like push two buttons. I can never remember which two they are at the same time, hold them to turn the thing off. Like they used to have an off switch. They don't have an off switch anymore. This is not good for human beings. We have an off switch. It's called sleep. Like every night we need 7, 8, 9 hours of sleep. And to have restless, relentless devices, that then all the notifications they're set up to give you, all these default settings are clearly not good for us. And I think we all feel it. The question is, can we redesign the way we use them to be good enough for us, or maybe truly good for us? And that's sort of what this book is about. Is there a way to actually use this technology in a way that is fully good for human beings rather than a mixed bag or really bad? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think it does make sense. And so I'm going to bridge that to the new book. So the book is The Life We're Looking For. Pick it up everywhere books are sold. Amazon, you can go on there and pick this resource up. It's going to be a blessing to you. And you talk a lot about what we at Harris Creek might call community or life groups. In the book, you call it canopies of trust. Would you say that our phones and social media, that layered application on top of it, is it good for canopies of trust or harmful for canopies of trust?
So I have a pretty radical view on this topic.
Oh.
I think real trust is only built in a durable way in person.
Yeah.
Wow.
Now, I'm not saying that you don't come to trust people you've never met in some sense. Like I might read someone's books and think, wow, I can learn a lot from this person. But I think, that phrase canopies of trust, it refers to these relationships we have that create a kind of, I think of it like an umbrella, a kind of protection from the unpredictability, the dangers, the wildness of life, this crazy life that all of us are trying to live in a healthy way. We need mutual two-way relationships where we know we are known and loved and are not going to be abandoned. And so while I can in a very limited way trust someone who I've met only through media or trust their opinion, say, on something, there's certainly authors I've never read or even media personalities I've never met who I think, I trust what they have to say on this topic or another, but I don't have a relationship of mutual trust with them, right? And I think that is only built in person. Primarily because of what I would call bandwidth. So right now we're having a conversation over audio and video, using Zoom as our medium. Zoom requires about, I forget the exact number, about 2 megabits per second, both directions of information stream. If we were together in person, the way you all actually are, we would be exchanging terabits of information per second. Like the amount you learn from another human being in person is so much greater than the amount that we can fit through our media streams, even through high definition video, that you just don't build trust unless you're with people.
Yeah, we don't trust you. I mean, to be clear, that's where if that's where you're
shouldn't.
going, I just want to affirm
You
your
should not trust
foregone
us,
conclusion.
maybe, is the...
I don't. I mean,
Smart.
the honest truth is you shouldn't trust me. You haven't lived with me. You haven't seen what I'm like when I haven't turned on the lighting for my camera and, prepared myself to be friendly, but you all have, because you work together, you've seen that. And the thing is, trust happens on the other side of what Kurt Thompson calls rupture and repair. Yeah. It's actually when things don't go right, that we learn whether we can trust the other person. And that happens so much more readily in person over time than it does over media. Yeah. So I do think media can be a kind of a little added layer to already trusting relationships, but you can't build the thing we most need as human beings with anything but being present in person.
It's really interesting timing. And so a part of the becoming something, a part of the shtick of our podcast is there is no script and we go a lot of different places. But did you track that, the news, the recent news where the Google employee was sent on leave because he said that artificial intelligence had sentience? Yesterday. Did you hear that or read anything about that?
Yeah. Google engineer interacted with an artificial intelligence model called Lambda that can answer questions and seem to interact in a conversation. And we have a purported transcript. It's not exactly verified, but the Washington Post published it, so it's probably true.
Yeah, and so it all culminated or ended with the bot saying, "I trust you." That's where that was the last thing I think that was said there is that, thank you for seeking consent for my well-being. And because of that, I trust you. And what you're watching is a human being manipulated by a machine is what it felt like to me. That's at least my summary of what happened. And it's really fascinating because I wonder if in the same way with pornography and so much of what technology offers us, if we're going to settle for a false representation of trust in the future, and really like we think we trust people, but we actually don't. Mm-hmm. And the only kind of trust that we've had, there'll be people that have lived their entire life, and the only trust they've ever tasted or experienced is a counterfeit version or a lesser version of trust.
I think that's very profound. I open the book, or
Nate
early in
actually
the
said
book,
it
I talk
first.
about
he told me that off camera. I'm just repeating some of his words.
credit where credit is due.
Yeah.
I open the book by talking about the difference between personal and personalized. So you can, a lot of digital stuff now is personalized, that it's designed to give you the simulation of being known and a kind of simulation of trust. So, Siri knows to call me Andy, hey, Andy, I've got your plane ticket or whatever. But personalized is missing. I think what Nate realized and passed on to you is there's a huge consequential difference between the simulation of a personal relationship and an actual personal relationship.
Yeah.
And I would say you are almost certainly right. And it's already true to an alarming extent. We have such good simulations now of things that we're made for, whether, intimacy,
Sure.
mediated by pornography, trust mediated by these conversational language models that will just get better and better. But it's very brittle. It breaks down in really unpredictable and damaging ways. It puts you at the mercy of systems that are not there for your good. Like the profit-fueled motives that are going to drive the deployment of things like this Lambda AI model are not designed to help us be better image bearers of God.
Yes.
I just guarantee there's no designer saying, let's make sure this thing helps heart, soul, mind, strength complexes grow in love. And therefore it's extreme. You are actually becoming more and more vulnerable and less able to be a person in the world, the more that you depend on these simulations.
And they're dependent upon us depending upon these devices, right?
Yeah,
because
totally.
What you were saying earlier about it's hard to even turn off your phone. I've noticed that with the screen time function. For a while I was like, they just need to have limits. And then they came up with limits. And even those are easy to break. And my husband has made a passcode for mine. And it will still every now and then just work. And I can stay on my phone as long as I want to and be on Instagram for hours. And I'm like, no, I need you to help me.
Yeah.
But they really want it to break down.
It's the lowest bar ever.
I mean,
it's like ignore what is it? Ignore
15
screen
minutes.
time limits.
Exactly. It's one little.
Well, that was
easy.
difficult. It's like who knows?
Totally.
Does anybody know I just ignored that?
No,
I'm going to get a call.
They want you to ignore it.
Yeah.
And even when you have a passcode, I've just it slips up and messes up all the time because they want you on it. And I think we just don't realize that, right? Especially this new generation, we don't think that our phones are basically telling us what to do or making us be addicted to them. And yet that's their entire goal.
Yeah. You talk about, we've heard emphasis placed on the nuclear family for so long, which can leave young adults who were raised in a broken home rather hopeless. And you, in the book, The Life We're Looking For, I find you give us a really hopeful outlook because you redefine that as households, and household can be roommates. It can be, those who would miss us if we were gone. They would realize they would be able to call the police and say, hey, has been missing for 48 hours now. Can you speak more to that? I want our audience to hear your take on that.
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought it up, because there's one way in which this book is about kind of how do we deal with this technological layer, and there's some things to do with that. But I actually think the deeper problem is we're just living in a world where it's so easy. In fact, I would say that the default setting of our world is loneliness. The default setting of our world is not enough true relationships, these canopies of trust that we all need to be human. So I want not just for a kind of response to the technology, but a response to the broken social world we're in, where so few of us have a durable, thick network of people. I'm not sure network is even a strong enough word. A family-like environment. I think it doesn't have to be biological or kin family, and in fact can't be to be enough. So the first Christians patterned their lives on the Greco-Roman institution of the household, which was far bigger than a father and a mother and children. It included all kinds of people who were related, sometimes through business connections, sometimes through friendship, sometimes through various forms of what was sort of a quasi-adoption. And in a household, you'd have all these different people. And it also, by the way, because in that world, slavery was just a fact of economic life, quite different from our own slavery in the American history, but still slavery. It included those people as well. So those who were kind of employed by, whether they could leave or not, employed by the household. And all this came together. And so the first Christians reframed it. It was no longer a single, pater familias with a patriarchal household. It was this new family in which everyone, no matter their status in the outside world, was a brother and a sister. They all ate at the same table. They had these communal meals together. They gathered, it sounds like in the New Testament, often on a daily basis in homes. And everybody had a place where they were known and under this canopy. And the reality is most Americans are not married. Many Americans will not marry, or if they were once married, will not marry again, whether because their marriage ended through divorce or through the death of their spouse. And we need a new model that's not nuclear family centric for what it's like to have that depth of community that is also found and should be found, under the shelter of a family. So when I was in my early 20s, I kind of stumbled into this. I moved in initially just to have roommates with 4 other guys. And then we were all Christian, and we were reading Acts 2, where it describes kind of the economic community.
Sure.
Acts 4 describes it as well. We're like, why don't we just set up a single bank account and start
we had all things
sharing
in common.
What?
So we did. So all our income went into one bank account. All our expenses came out of one bank account.
That is wild.
And we did that for 4 years. Then a couple of us did move out and get married. I did as well. But for several years, we discovered by making this really at some level crazy commitment with our finances, it unlocked a level of trust actually, and a level of interdependence that was so good for us.
Yeah.
And then when my wife and I got married, for the first 5 years we were married, we lived with other people, not just as a solo or a single couple unit. And we're actually just about to move back in with friends. In 1 month, we're going to be moving into the first floor of a house owned by friends of ours who have teenage kids at home and her mother at home. So we'll have this intergenerational, not just kin household that we'll be living in for the next year in Boston.
Why are you choosing to do that?
You're a radical.
Well, I'm sure I'm not radical enough to be as healthy as I should be, but I'm doing it because we have just concluded we desperately need this level of presence in our lives of other people.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. I'm doing it for my own survival and thriving.
Say what you're going to do again. I don't want them to miss
Well, in terms of the household we'll be living in a month, it's a 3-story house with a unit on the first floor that we'll rent from our friends who have been friends for 20 years. We've known them since before they had kids. They now have teenage kids, and her mother is quite old and quite infirm and lives on the 2nd and 3rd floors with them. And we will not have a common bank account. At least that's not the plan right now.
It's communal living. I mean, it is.
We'll just
biblical.
live together.
Yeah. I mean, it's what you see in the scriptures, and I hate that it's radical. It frustrates me.
Exactly.
Because if you start, especially in Waco, you start talking about building a compound and hey, we're going to live in community. People start looking at you weird. And I'm just like, man, that's what I see in the scripture. Let me say something to this too. I wrote about this before, but when I was a pagan, so I was raised in the church, but didn't follow Jesus. And college life and young adult life really was just a lot of gusto for the world and the things of the world. But I had roommates. And the way I would describe that season of my life is I felt so invincible because these guys, anywhere I went, they were with me. And I felt like we had the resources and the wisdom, and it was worldly wisdom, to be able to navigate anything that, if somebody wanted to pick a fight, I had the guys with me. If we were going to try to be outwitted or conned in some way, it's like, man, that's not going to happen because we're together. And it gave me this sense of security. And with that, you talk about Acts 2, they had all things in common. What I remember about that time is there really wasn't this obsession about money. And I know that we always think worldly people are obsessed about money, but we would run up, $60 to $120 bar tabs and then somebody would just pick it up, and we didn't have that $60 to $120 at the time was everything. It's like somebody was going overdrawn, paying that bar tab, but it was just communal. Like it was, and you had this kind of, no, hey, I got it this time, and you didn't give it any thought, and none of us did. It was just like, oh yeah, no, we got each other, we're in it for each other. And then I went into the church, I became a Christian, and I experienced flavors of that in the church. But by and large, I think that there's aspects of worldly people that are really good at that, and especially in other religions, that are really good at that. I mean, I've been to the, to Jordan, where you compliment somebody's goat and they're giving it to you. It's like, hey, it's now your goat. And there's a level of hospitality. You say you're traveling, and they just say, hey, come in, here's your bedroom, and I'm like, I don't know you, and they're like, yeah, but it doesn't matter. We want to care for you. And so I hate when non-Christians are better at being Christians than Christians, So.
And I think when we get outside of this, I think what you are describing reflects, unfortunately, American Christianity's complicity with what I would basically call the system of mammon. I think what's driving the whole story of our society is mammon. And mammon, John Tyson, who's a pastor who you all may know, good friend of ours at Praxis where I work, and he gave this incredible talk on mammon to our entrepreneurs, and he defined it as abundance without dependence. The dream of mammon is abundance without dependence.
Yeah.
And the whole Western world has bought this dream. Even though you can travel to other places in our world right now where people don't live that way. They live incredibly interdependently. And then there are pockets and moments in our lives, especially I think young adulthood is a moment where often we do actually experience some of what we're made for, but then you sort of get the message, often reinforced by the church, that, well, it's time to grow up and basically become independent, move into a smaller, single family home, like join this middle class kind of vision of the good life. And it's actually the path to loneliness, disengagement, a less fulfilling life. But mammon has a very, very powerful grip on our imaginations.
And you reference
not just in the West, but in the church.
You reference it in the book, and Jesus in Matthew 6 verse 24 uses the word. It's probably translated in most of our Bibles money, and you say, hey, that word is actually mammon, and this is the concept that you're talking about. And so you defined it as abundance without dependence. Is that what you said? An abundance. What do you mean by that, abundance without dependence?
So the dream behind money, money is a perfectly useful thing. It's a medium exchange, unit of account, store of value for exchanging value between human beings. There's no fundamental problem with it, except when we start to think, oh, if I have this, I can get whatever I want without relationship. I can get whatever I want without needing other people, because money talks, right? So when I walk into a convenience store, I don't know anyone in the store, but I can pick anything out. And if I have enough credit on my card, I can take it out of the store, right, without any relationship. Now, there's some real benefits to that. I'm not saying it's bad for us to have a money economy, but the dream that could become the pattern for my life. In other words, all I need is money, and then I get whatever I want without having to become a different kind of person or have different kinds of relationships. That's a very dangerous dream. And I think that dream is whispered into the ears of humanity by a power that's at work in the world. And this is why I think when Jesus says you cannot serve God, and he doesn't actually just use the ordinary word for money, and Matthew and Mark don't translate it into Greek. They keep the Aramaic word Jesus used, mammon, or however it's pronounced in Aramaic. And what kind of words do we not translate? It's personal names. Like if I'm talking about Jonathan, I don't translate Jonathan into whatever that originally meant in Hebrew or whatever. I just say the word Jonathan, whether I'm speaking French or Italian or whatever. Well, the reason Matthew and Mark don't translate it is Jesus is not just talking about a thing. He's talking about a quasi-personal demonic power in the world that's whispered. When you have money, or when you live in a money economy, it whispers in your ear and says, you could build your life around this, and then you would be free of obligation, of dependence, of vulnerability, of risk. Just serve this thing. And that's what Mammon's telling us all the time.
So the way you're talking, you're saying like relationships kind of solve everything, but the problem is that people aren't perfect. Like you get married and you're like, oh my gosh, like I didn't realize all these things about my spouse. You're gonna move to Boston and they're just gonna want to eat clam chowder all the time, and you're like, you're not who I thought I was. And you get in a life group and it's like, my life just got more complicated.
Honestly.
More complicated.
So how is that better? It's like I feel like I'm better on my own. I'd rather just deal with my stuff and not yours too.
Mm-hmm.
Oh man. It will not work without forgiveness. I mean, this is what you have to learn to make it work. Is because even before I get to the other people's problems, I have my own shame, right? My fear of not just me knowing them and being annoyed by them, but them knowing me and being annoyed by me. And I mean, you're absolutely right. Life gets more complicated when you have relationships. I will say, however, life is complicated already, and whether you're alone or not, it's complicated. And we have a lot of evidence piling up that the lonelier people get, the worse off they are in every measure of health.
Yeah.
So the problem is, yes, I mean, the moment you commit to a relationship, you're committing to pain.
Yeah.
You're committing to suffering, you're committing to disappointment, but you are also committing to the path, if you stay with it, to the path past that pain and suffering and disappointment that is called forgiveness and called repair and repentance.
Yeah.
And on the other side of that is a depth of trust. Like I've been married for 20, this is my problem. Is it 27? It's 27 as of right now.
Oh yeah.
In a month I'll be 28.
Get that right here, because you're going to need it later.
I know, right? I know, right? 28 years, there's been a lot of rupture, and there are some things that are not fully healed at this moment, but there has also been a lot of repair.
Yeah.
There is a depth of trust that I would never have if I floated through life with people who like me on social media.
Yeah.
Wow.
And definitely I'm not going to have if I just let the AI like be that personalized
It's
simulation.
so important. You guys have to understand this. The greatest relationships that you will ever experience are ones that have gone through repair. And if there's not a repairing, what you're left with or what you're experiencing is typically shallow.
Yeah,
and if you are taught to run from the circumstances that require repair, you're going to look back on your life and realize that everything you've had has been the equivalent of false trust or AI or a shallow relationship. And it's the way I was taught this early on is just like when steel breaks, when it's welded together, the weld is actually stronger than it was to begin with. And it's cheesy cliche pastor talk, but I've said that this past weekend, when two neighbors in my neighborhood were in dispute, I'm just like, hey guys, this can go one of two ways. It can go Hatfields and McCoys, and that retaining wall between you can get wider and wider and wider. Or you can walk over on that door and you can sit in that living room until you guys work through this, so that one of you doesn't have to move, and so that your children can see conflict resolution, modeled well. And I just think it's so important. And this is like marriages that don't get divorced, that they push past the 7-year itch, end up being healthier than they were to begin with. We can't just run from this conflict. How is it pronounced, by the way? I just bothered me, and you would know. Is it Mammon?
Oh,
Nate's the
so
scholar.
I went to seminary, so
So did I.
Mammon.
Oh, okay, Mammon. So it's Italian.
It's Italian.
Okay,
Jesus
got
was
it.
Italian?
Got it.
Yes.
Wow.
Got it.
Straight from Sicily.
Got it.
I kind of have a question. Well, I do have a question. It's kind of a little bit back to what we were talking about at the beginning, but we just identified that technology in particular, it's causing us more division. It's causing us more isolation. I see this so much in upcoming generations. My 15-year-old niece is staying with us this week, and she said that at the lunch table, they just all are on their phones, and she's
I know.
like just doesn't make friends because they're not forced to look at each other and talk.
Yes.
And then when they are alone together, it's awkward if they don't have that thing that they rely on as kind of an icebreaker. So what could be some tips for our listeners that we're talking to in their early 20s and 30s? How do you form relationships? How do you utilize technology in a helpful way that doesn't hurt those relationships you're trying to build? What would be some tips from the expert?
I'm not an expert on doing it today as a 20 something, because
Yeah.
I'm not a 20 something anymore. And it's really hard. I think
Yeah.
we should give ourselves permission to just acknowledge, like, this world that we've inherited
hard.
is messed up
Totally.
for the things that are best for human beings. So don't expect it to be easy. Don't expect it to come quickly. I mean, I would actually say the most important thing is physical proximity. Like,
Mhm.
move closer to the people you have some reason to believe you should grow in trust with, your
Mhm.
friends, your family, your church. Get closer, because if you're further away, you're going to have to rely on media more and more. And media is always a second best to unmediated presence. So, especially if you're young and have options, like, use your optionality. I used to say this to college students when they were getting ready to graduate and were thinking about where to move. I said, most people think that jobs are scarce and friends are plentiful.
Dude.
So they move to where they can find a job and then figure they'll find friends. And it's actually completely the other way around.
Yep.
Jobs are plentiful,
Yep.
friends are scarce. And so move
good.
for your friends and then figure out how you put a roof over your head. But as to technology specifically,
Mhm.
I would say when you're using it, probably the number one thing I'd say is increase the bandwidth. So other things being equal, I think video is better than audio and audio is better than text, because we get more of one another from especially the voice. When you cross from texting to talking,
Mhm.
it's the expansion of what you learn, because most of our communication is emotion, not information. Emotion is the way we human beings make sense of the world, not cognition or rational thinking. So the voice has so much emotion, but so does the face, right? We're
Mhm.
sort of built to communicate primarily, above all, through voice and face. So maximize that. When you're talking to somebody, close the other windows, so you're really looking at their face. Like, if it has to be on a screen, like, only look at them. Try to feel like what it's like to be them. The more you can increase the bandwidth, the better communication you'll have.
Mhm.
And what else would I say? I really think the three things that I do not believe can be sustainably done except in person are trust, as we've talked about, creativity, and conflict. So when you sense a conflict brewing, go to the person. And I have sometimes, even in recent years, I've literally gotten on a plane to
Wow.
be with a friend who we're no longer, in the same place. And I just sense there's conflict. I'm like, I'm not going to work this out over email. I'm getting on a plane. So we can't always do that.
Right.
And sometimes you have to settle for second best, but the more you can do trust, creativity, and conflict in person, the more you can actually do other things, at a distance. So, I mean, my wife just texted me. She needs to be picked up from the train station at 7:30 tonight. We can do that by text. That's fine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But trust and conflict and the creative work of what do we want our lives to be like? What's our dream for the next season of our life? That stuff, save that for in person.
Yeah.
How much are these ideas, like your time spent researching? Because you're obviously, like, just listening to you talk, I'm like, man, you should write a book. Like, you are very, very intelligent.
He did write
Oh,
a
he
book.
did write a book. There we go. But how much of it is your time, like, researching, whether it's the Washington Post, whatever else you read, and just the way you follow Jesus, like, through Scripture? Because I know with you, like, there's this pairing of it, but how do you balance that? How much of it is the way you follow Jesus versus, like, your research of culture?
Gosh, what an interesting question, Nate. I mean, it's hard to disentangle it. I spend a lot of time reading. I spend a lot of time reading books, because books are the most condensed form of thought, I think, available. So I try to stick with books, as tempting as it is to spend all my time on Twitter. So I do spend a lot of time reading. I actually think my spiritual formation, to be totally honest, I have a subpar personal prayer life, if I'm just being totally candid with you. I'm not that good at sitting down by myself and entering the presence of God with the Word of God. But I will say I have, if I dare say, an above par hunger for Christian fellowship and discipleship together. And so I just relentlessly seek out friends to pray with, to read Scripture with, and I've had the great gift of friends who, like, push me in Christ, like, along, who spur me on, right, to love and good works. And so a lot of whatever I have to offer just comes from, I'm 54 years old, and for 35 years, I've been very seriously pursuing this. Well, really 40 years now. I was 14 when I came to faith. And even in high school, I was just seriously pursuing, okay, what does this mean? I think this is the pearl of great price. How do I sell everything else in my life to get this kingdom that Jesus talks about? And the accumulation is some days on some topics I have something to offer, but we're all still learning, and the world keeps changing, and we have to figure out, okay, what do we do with this? And it's wisdom and discernment that's needed, and it's not easy for any of us.
Well, he has a lot to offer. The book we're discussing is The Life We're Looking For by Andy Crouch. I love the title, and a big takeaway for me from this discussion is you are choosing your problems. And I know you said earlier that there's real complications that go with and complexities that go with adding community to your life, but there are real complications and complexities that go with isolation. And the complexities that go with community and adding or living in a canopy of trust, as Andy puts it, they're the ones that you were meant to grow in. This is where you can experience love.
Yes.
This is where you can experience relationship. This is where you can experience just things that are real. When all of us can buy a Sprinter or build a barn on the side of a mountain off the grid and hunt for our food and kill it and go years without interacting with a human, and if we do not get eaten by a mountain lion, I promise you we're going to experience some pretty dark depression. And that we were not created in the Imago Dei to bloom in that soil.
But that's just because you're an extrovert, though.
No, it has nothing to do with being an extrovert, and everything to do with being made in the image of a communal God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, who has existed eternally in perfect community. We've been created out of His love for His glory, and made to have relationships. And so I love that message, Andy. So I'm thankful for you continuing to further that message. I think you've done, I think you're someone we're going to read about in history books. 200, 500 years, should the Lord tarry, should He not return between now and then. I think you're going to be someone who has shaped what thoughtful people think about such things. And I'm really thankful for you. Thanks for jumping on and just sharing your influence with us.
Appreciate it.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Guys, thank you for tuning in to Becoming Something. We'll see you next week.
Thanks for tuning in to Becoming Something, where we promise to keep the conversation honest and real for young adults in their 20s and 30s. Every moment we live is training for a future moment, and that's why we do this podcast. Because we want you to be prepared for everything that life is going to throw at you. Our hope with this podcast is that it would help you become all that God desires you to be. To find out more, visit becomingsomething.com.